Colleagues, this is my last council session with you. Allow me to be direct. Nearly 3 years ago, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the Kremlin believed it could conquer another sovereign nation in violation of the UN Charter with little resistance. The Ukrainians, for their part, proved the Kremlin wrong and are courageously fighting for their homeland and future, for their Ukrainian identity, for their children, for their freedom, for their lives. The United States, as a permanent member of this Council, and along with partners from around the globe, will continue to help Ukraine defend itself from Russia's aggression. This is because we still believe in the UN Charter, which should remain the foundation of states' conduct. Ukraine must prevail against Russia's war of choice. There must be a just, sustainable peace rooted in the UN Charter. This document, the UN Charter, has meaning. It has helped keep the world safe from the scourge of another world war for 80 years. For 80 years, through thick and thin, this Council has worked together to uphold its principles and to oppose territorial conquest. But today, a permanent member of this Council is openly and unashamedly violating the UN Charter. Russia is violating resolutions of this Council, which it voted for, resolutions meant to keep a rogue nation from acquiring nuclear weapons. Nearly 3 years ago, we sat with the Russians in this chamber, urging de-escalation, negotiations, peace talks, anything but war. The Kremlin did not listen then, because Putin does not listen to the words spoken here. In that regard, I have to refer to another permanent member of this Council. China's support for Russia is in clear contradiction to the principles of the UN Charter. China has said in this Council that sovereignty and territorial integrity should be respected. But if China were serious about that, it would use its influence to stop Russia from violating Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Let's look not at China's words, but its actions. China continues to supply Russia's war industrial base with dual-use items, like bomb-making materials, machine parts, equipment and tools for weapons factories, technology powering drones and missiles. Russia needs these Chinese products for its attacks against Ukraine's civilians and infrastructure. Chinese companies provide them, profit from them. By continuing to permit these exports, Beijing's telegraphs tacit approval of Russia's war, and PRC companies have even helped develop and produce long-range attack UAVs for Russia. If China truly wants a peaceful resolution to Russia's war against Ukraine, it must end its supply to Russia's war machine, impose sanctions on Russia, call on Russia to withdraw its troops, and lead the international community as a permanent member of this Council responsible for safeguarding the principles of the UN Charter. Instead, China is a decisive enabler of Russia's war against Ukraine and has refused to use its influence constructively. It has given Russia political cover by repeating Russia's false justifications for the war and by suggesting we should ignore the UN Charter because, quote, the situation on the ground has changed, unquote. China has suggested we not link Russia's aggression in Ukraine with the DPRK's pursuit of nuclear weapons, while it is clear Russia is helping the DPRK with its nuclear ambitions in return for troops and weapons to use against Ukraine. When it comes to Russia, China has demonstrated it is not a legitimate actor for peace. In this Council, China outlined its 3 principles for the war: no expansion of the battlefield, no escalation of the conflict, and no provocations. But China stood aside as Russia violated all 3 principles by bringing the DPRK into the conflict. Russia has deployed nearly 12,000 DPRK troops, including elite special forces, to fight against Ukraine. Russia has also violated multiple resolutions of this Council by importing from the DPRK more than 20,000 shipping containers of munitions, containing at least 6 million heavy artillery rounds and well over 100 ballistic missiles. China has considerable influence with both Moscow and Pyongyang, but it has declined to use that influence to oppose Russia-DPRK military cooperation. China has not criticized Russia for importing missiles and Shahed drones from Iran, or for testing on the people of Ukraine an experimental hypersonic missile capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. In this Council, China has called for the protection of civilians and prisoners of war, but China has failed to condemn Russia's forces for committing summary executions, arbitrary detentions, torture, rape, and other forms of sexual violence, forced deportations of hundreds of children, deliberate attacks on Ukraine's energy grid and other critical infrastructure. China did not end its support to Russia when Russia weakened global food security by blockading grain exports through the Black Sea and by attacking grain ships, grain ports, and Ukraine's food production. Colleagues, Russia listens only to strength in action, something we collectively lacked when Russia invaded Crimea and when it invaded Georgia before that. Appeasement didn't work then, and it won't work now. That is why the United States and our partners will continue supporting Ukraine and the UN Charter's fundamental principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. As an international community, we must reject wars of aggression. Look, I understand there were airstrikes both ways across the Russia-Ukraine border in the past 24 hours. Regrettably, there are reports that civilians were killed on both sides. We shouldn't be here. No civilian, Russian or Ukrainian, should be suffering. Russia started this war, and Russia can end this suffering. This is, as I said, my last council meeting with you. It has been an honor to serve in this council. The work we do matters. Our willingness to hold bad actors responsible matters. I wish that I could leave you on a more positive note. If Russia isn't held accountable, many more people will suffer in preventable wars. No leader should ever again believe they can conquer another country and not face a united global resistance. The world must always respond with strength to deter further aggression. I thank you for your camaraderie and leave you with my best wishes and with hope. I thank you.
Taking into account that this is your last meeting of the Council, please allow me to be very candid. We have always been, after all, but you have decided to only do so today, as you've just announced. If the United States had not supported the coup d'etat in Kiev in 2014, had not sponsored it, had not made Ukraine into an anti-Russia, had not allowed Ukraine, the Kiev regime, to undermine the Kiev agreements, which was something that was announced openly by the politicians who were supposed to be the guarantors of the agreement, then we wouldn't have had this at all. There would not have been the Crimea situation if the Kiev authorities, which came into power as a result of a coup in Kiev, had abided by the rights of all of its citizens instead of going against them with the so-called anti-terrorist operation using the army of Ukraine, which, by the way, is something that's prohibited in the Ukrainian constitution. Mr. President, even during the time that elapsed since our last meeting on Ukraine on the 16th of December, the trends that we pointed out then have become even more clear. And they can be summed up in the following manner. On the one hand, we have the United States administration, which lost the elections, but it's trying desperately to use up the remainder of monies to support Ukraine. At the same time, what is being done by the American politicians, the lame ducks, is in contradiction with the line that is proclaimed by the elect American president, who will enter into office on the 20th of January. On the other hand, the expired Ukrainian president, losing on the battleground, is doing everything he can to undermine any peaceful initiatives and to provoke Russia into escalating the conflict. Over the recent days, the former Ukrainian comedian has managed to make at least 3 steps taking us away from a peaceful resolution of the conflict. On the 18th of December in Moscow, there was an explosion as a result of which the head of the Radiation, Chemical and Biological Defense Forces was killed. Mr. Kirillov was killed and his assistants, and this was done at the behest of the Kiev regime. The next day, the perpetrator of this act of terror was apprehended, and he confirmed that he had been recruited by the Ukrainian special services. This crime inhumane and terrorist nature of the current Ukrainian leadership. These crimes and others aimed against the Russian elite, military, creative, and political. What's behind them are the Western mentors of Kiev, and they are trying to not pay attention to what is going on and thus betraying those principles that they constantly proclaim internationally. In this regard, I would like to mention that General Kirillov has on many occasions provided facts confirming the military biological activity of Washington in Ukraine, and we have every reason to believe that in these closed biological laboratories by the United States, which are located all over the world, what was being done was biological weapons were being developed. And we would like to assure that the American puppeteers in Kiev that our investigations of these things will not end with the death of Mr. Kirillov. We need to shed light on all of the anti-humane experiences on the Ukrainians. The next step to escalate was undertaken yesterday when yet another shelling was approved inside the Russian territory using long-range weaponry. On the 18th of December, ATACMS and Storm Shadows were used so as to strike a facility in Rostov Oblast. All of the missiles were destroyed by our air defense. One managed to impact damage on a technical building. The Kiev regime knew then that there would be immediate reaction to this strike. And it did happen. In the early hours of today, there was a group strike using precision long-range strike on a Ukrainian Air Force command post, the design bureau Luch, which deals with missile developments, and also the Patriot complex, which was nearby. The goals of that strikes were attained. All of the objects were hit, and according to our information, some high-ranking Ukrainian armed forces people were hit. And the third step now towards escalation, the mass missile strike against the city of Rilsk in the Kursk Oblast. This took place in the day today from the multiple rocket launch system HIMARS. The goal of the attack were the culture center, a stadium, a teacher's college, a school, and a fireman's unit. According to current information, 6 people died, including 1 child. 10 people are in a hospital. As you can understand, our reaction to this crime against peaceful citizens will not be long in coming. And acting this way, that Zelensky ignores the interests and opinion of his own citizens, who a considerable number of them are speaking against new escalation steps as they lead to the destruction of companies and energy objects which are important for the Ukrainian economy. As a result of that, the capacity of Ukraine to live through this winter is something that many experts are questioning. But the former comedian, in order to keep himself in power, is prepared to endanger the entire country he is holding hostage and sacrifice all of its citizens. His henchmen are daily capturing people on the streets and sending them to the front. And this, of course, impacts the quality and the morale of the Ukrainian army. As a result, according to the Ukrainian military leaders themselves, the number of deserters at the end of November was 200,000 people. Just in November, 85,000 Ukrainian military left their positions. This is 3 times the number in October. Also, those Ukrainians which are being trained abroad are deserting. In Poland alone, on average, 12 people leave their training. In France, They are saying that the Anakivska brigade disappeared and the remain of the brigade had to be disbanded. And this is the elite of the Ukrainian army. The losses of the Ukrainian army in 2024 exceeded 560,000, and since 2022, that number is over 1 million. So the Western masters of Ukraine are trying not to notice that. For example, the outgoing Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, yesterday recently demanded that Kiev start mobilizing people as of 18 years of age. Currently, the age of recruitment is 26. Boris Johnson, the same person who prevented Russia and Ukraine of signing peace in the March of 2022, acknowledged in one of his interviews that the West is fighting Russia in Ukraine by proxy. Well, you remember what Lindsey Graham said something about that. In September 2023, he said assisting Ukraine by the United States, he called that a good investment for the American people. We're destroying the Russian army, he said, without losing a single soldier, he said, triumphantly in Kiev. And very recently, Colonel Todd Schmidt, in his report, stated that the war in Ukraine became an open-air laboratory for the American military. Mr. President, calling the military campaign in Ukraine a good investment, Mr. Graham, when he was saying that, was not just using this as a figure of speech. Ukraine have become a gold mine for the military-industrial complex for Anglo-Saxon countries and its allies, most of all for the American companies. According to data in 2023, half of all of the weapons sales was by the American countries. They received $317 billion, 50% of global revenue from that. Overall, the revenue of 100 major weapons manufacturers in 2023, according to the data from the Stockholm Institute on Peace Research, reached $632 billion. It would be naive to think that these unprincipled traders would give up on their huge profits for the benefit of the hapless Ukrainians. At the same time, the military companies work in direct link with the Kiev regimes. 25 foreign lobby and consulting companies have started representing the interests of Ukraine free of charge. One of such companies is BGR Government Affairs, and their leadership publicly called for increasing military assistance to Kiev. By the way, one of their clients is a major supplier and exporter of weapons, the American Raytheon company. There's another method which is being used by the American military-industrial complex. It's the financing of analytical centers, and then conclusions on their use by the mass media. So money is being made not just by manufacturing their weapons to the Ukrainians, but they're also using the American citizens when they artificially pad the prices of their goods. Despite the fact that this undermines the well-being of Americans, the outgoing American administration is applying up with the manufacturing companies on this, especially since, as was said by Mr. Blinken, most of the $100 billion spent by Washington to Ukraine is spent within the American military-industrial complex. And this is the way this problem was commented by the independent Senator Bernie Sanders. He said that the military subcontractors padded their prices by 40% and sometimes as incredible as 4,000%. In October, the RTX Corporation and Raytheon that I just earlier mentioned is part of that, was fined $950 million for artificially hiking the prices for the Ministry of Defense. They also misled about their costs and bribes to make sure that they receive their contracts. Then Bernie Sanders continued and said that when you start talking about improving the lives of American workers, what he hears as a response is, no, we can't afford that. But when you start talking about the military-industrial complex, what he hears, yes, almost without any debate. We have already stated at the last meeting why this criminal campaign, including the man in the green sweater, of the audit of the amount given to Ukraine by the Trump team. And the European Union also should be talking about a possible audit. Ursula von der Leyen have already gave them 130 billion euros. 47.3 is military assistance. The words by Bernie Sanders only illustrate the level of corruption which accompanies Western supplies of weapons to the Kiev regime. We're discovering new details of this criminal business. Recently, for example, it was announced that the audit of the Department of Defense, the United States, showed that there was an incorrect inventory of the Javelin missiles to Kiev, and the Pentagon has to admit that the whereabouts of more than half of Javelin and Stingers sent to Ukraine are unknown. We can help our American colleagues here. If you want to know where they are, please take a look at the dark internet trading platforms, and you can see that terrorists of all kinds are buying them up, possibly so as to use them in the regional conflict somewhere in Africa or even in an American or European airport. You will have been warned by us about this. Distinguished colleagues, it's difficult to say what this will end up doing for Ukraine and its leader, who is trying to pull the wool over everyone's eyes by saying that he's ready for peace. In actual fact, he's doing everything to escalate the conflict. As we have stated many times, peace for him is the worst possible scenario because for him, with only 11% support on the part of the citizens of Ukraine, what we'll have to do then is organize elections and lose power and then be held accountable for all of the crimes he committed against his own people when he became a pawn in the geopolitical game played by the West against Russia. Therefore, he is afraid of negotiations of any kind, and he rejects one peace initiative after another. For example, the recent one from President Orban about Christmas truce and POW exchange. The real attitude of the Kiev clique to any negotiations was expressed by the head of President's office, the Great Cardinal Andrei Yermak. He said that the real negotiations on peace will only start when Russia will have depleted all of its resources for military activities. As you all understand, what this means is never. And this true face of the gang in power in Ukraine is something that we are familiar with that. We have no illusions, all the more so since, as we have stated, we do not need a frozen conflict. What we need is to make sure that there is a resolution, a just resolution, and a long-term one, and elimination all of the root causes for it, which everyone well knows. So my advice to all of those who is hoping that the military activities will stop, please do not have any illusions about the real intent of the comedian Zelensky. We never had them to begin with, and we therefore continue a special military operation whose goals will be implemented. And then, in conclusion, one more point. At the beginning of this month, a delegation of the United States insisted on having a meeting on Ukrainian children whose rights Russia is supposedly violating. We drew the attention of our colleagues then in contradistinction to the fabricated topic of the Ukrainian children, which is used by the Kiev regime so as to smear Russia. There are other children-related topics which demand the attention of the Security Council, in particular, the situation of children in Gaza, in the occupied Palestinian territory as a whole. We called at the time the United States to have a meeting on that before the presidency ends. Of course, our American colleagues did not heed this appeal of ours. The fate of the children in Gaza is not of interest to them, and this topic is inconvenient for their strategic ally, Israel. We think such double standards are unacceptable for this in the Security Council. We therefore are going to request a meeting on children in Palestine in January, and would ask the upcoming Algerian presidency to keep that in mind for their plan of work. Thank you.
President, I thank High Representative Nakamitsu for her briefing. At present, the crisis in Ukraine continues to drag on, and the fighting has shown no signs of abatement. The continued influx of large quantities of weapons and ammunition into the battlefield with expanding varieties, increasing lethality and destruction, and the greater risks of diversion and proliferation is a cause for deep concern. I wish to reiterate that weapons may help win the war, but cannot bring about lasting peace. It is imperative to observe the three principles of no expansion of the battlefield, no escalation of fighting, and no provocation by any party, and to promote a de-escalation as soon as possible. We once again call on the parties to the conflict to move towards the same direction and start peace talks at an early date. We call on the international community to actively create conditions and provide assistance to this end. President, since the outbreak of the war, China has been calling on the parties to the conflict to realize a ceasefire, start negotiations, and restore peace as soon as possible. This is what we have been saying and what we have been doing in the past 3 years or so. China has always been committed to promoting a political settlement and has been working for peace and promoting dialogue. The day before yesterday, the Group of Friends for Peace on the Ukraine Crisis held another meeting, during which representatives of 17 countries of the Global South,
17个
Brazil, Algeria, South Africa, and Turkey jointly assessed the current situation, expressed concern over the recent escalation of the conflict, reaffirmed the importance of respect for the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, and the legitimate concerns of all states, and reiterated their strong call for the cessation of hostilities as soon as possible, and for the realization of a comprehensive and lasting political settlement of the Ukraine crisis on the basis of the UN Charter and international law. At the same time, they also reaffirmed the readiness of the countries of the Global South to continue to play a constructive role to that end. President, China's efforts for peace are well known to the international community and have received recognition and support of the vast majority of countries, Russia, Ukraine, countries of the Global South, and many European countries have all welcomed China's role and contribution to the resolution of the Ukraine crisis. The United States is the only country that has chosen to turn a blind eye to China's efforts and has continued to spread false information in public. Just now, your colleague, Ambassador Wood, in his statement as the U.S. representative, said that this may be the last time for him to participate in council meeting. I see that he is no longer here. Yet, he didn't give up the last chance to blatantly attack and smear China, making it sound as if it were China's fault that the war has continued to this day. I have responded to the relevant erroneous remarks of the U.S. side many times before, so I will not repeat them today. Given that this may be the last time this year for the Council to consider the Ukraine issue and may well be the last open meeting of the Security Council, looking ahead to the new year, I
提出3点希望。
3 points of hope to the U.S. side. First, China didn't create the Ukraine crisis, nor is it a party to the crisis. The United States cannot, on the one hand, hope that China will play a greater role in ending the war, while, on the other hand, keeps discrediting China's efforts for peace and continues to slander and put pressure on China. We hope that the U.S. will stop its senseless blame game and its provocation of antagonism and confrontation. Instead, it should work with the countries concerned, including China, to build unity and consensus and create conditions and an atmosphere conducive to a political settlement of the Ukraine crisis. Second, no country in the world can enjoy absolute security. One country's security cannot be at the expense of other countries' security. The United States, under the pretext of maintaining regional security, attempts to use this opportunity to weaken and contain other countries to serve its own agenda. This will only create more disputes and chaos in the world. We hope that the United States will abandon the zero-sum mentality of the Cold War, stop taking advantage of the Ukraine crisis to advance its geopolitical strategy, and make real efforts for the early restoration of peace and stability on the European continent. Third, the current situation regarding the Ukraine issue is changing. Both parties to the conflict have released political signals to the outside world, clearly expressing their willingness to engage in negotiations. The international community's discussions are increasingly geared towards negotiations and edging closer to peace. This fully demonstrates that the momentum for a ceasefire, an end to the war, and the restoration of peace is building up. We hope that the United States will face up to the changes in the situation, stop clamoring for war, stop obstructing the efforts of the international community for peace, and come to the right track of promoting a political settlement to the crisis at an early date. Thank you.
An aggressor cannot undertake an unprovoked invasion of another country and then argue that that country's self-defense is escalatory. Ukraine has a right to defend itself in the war that Russia has chosen to wage against it. The United States and countries around the world will continue to support Ukraine in that defense. Just last night, Russia launched 7 missiles and 65 drones against Kyiv. A couple of those missiles appear to have struck residential and office buildings, including diplomatic missions, a technical school, a gas pipe, killing 1 and injuring 11, and leaving 630 residential buildings and multiple medical facilities and schools damaged. With respect to the comments from the representative from China, one might ask, where is the condemnation for Russia's attacks of last night? Where are the words telling Russia to end their war? This war could have, should have ended long ago without your support to Russia. This is not a smear, it is a fact. China has supplied Russia with the political cover and material it needs to wage this war. If China is uncomfortable with that fact, China should stop supplying Russia with what it needs to continue the war. Then, and only then, the United States will stop calling out China for enabling an unprovoked war of aggression that violates the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a UN member state. I shall now resume my role as President of the Council. The representative of Russia has asked for the floor to make a further statement.
Madam President, I just wanted to ask you, you have read out the summary of the U.S. statement which was made by a U.S. representative in the beginning of this meeting.
I shall speak in my national capacity. This was an additional statement. I resume my function as President of the Council.